the appropriate level of income for marginalized people that would actually help reduce the cost on healthcare, help reduce the cost and pressure on policing. All for all the right reasons. That was canceled, and now today we see the resurgence of that very thing by virtue of the federal government actually delivering money into the hands of individuals in our community that are not employed right now. And so hopefully there's a kind of a deeper understanding as we come out of this that social services and providing appropriate funding for individuals that are unemployed, and that unemployment number is increasing, is the right step to take, not the wrong step to take. And so there's much to be learned through this pandemic. Certainly, much to be learned through the whole Black Lives Matter movement. Much to be learned in terms of how we can do things better. And I think the notion of just indiscriminately defunding police because they're angry is not the right step to take. Having a look at what police have been pulled into over the decades that certainly that I've been involved, would be an interesting conversation to have. Coast, police do a terrific job of preventing or providing an opportunity for people to find housing. The mental health work that's being done, very important work that stops people from getting institutionalized or at least put in prison, and where they rightfully belong in a care center somewhere. So decriminalizing mental health, very, very important. I think that's an objective for us all. So I think people need to understand and appreciate, and I appreciate the motion that there's significant impact relative to defunding police that I don't think the public at large is prepared to sign on to. So a good understanding of what that means, given in the same breath that we're asked to defund police, we're also asked to provide body-worn cameras, which may or may not be the right way to go, but adds a couple of $1 million or more to a budget for policing, not only here but right across the province. And so it's a complex issue. I think we ought to have information in front of us in terms of what it means. So I really support the motion in terms of getting some parameters around that. And at the same time, we also need to evaluate and assess, the systemic, racism that occurs, and that we all need to stand against, and stand up for those that are being marginalized, discriminated against because of the color of their skin. I don't think any of us will ever be able to relate to what that means for people, but anecdotally, I have friends that are married to a Afro-Canadian spouse that happens to be well placed person in terms of her employment, that gets stopped on a regular basis. Not a regular basis, gets stopped. You and I might get stopped for a headlight out of the car, or the bumper's off, or we're speeding, or whatever it is. Anecdotally, this individual gets stopped for no apparent reason on occasion, and that's concerning, and that is the kind of systemic racism that is being talked about. Why is it those incidents happen much more frequently in the Black community than they do anywhere else? That's a reality that we have to face and work against, and I know that we have many things in place to attempt to do that, but there's more to do. In any event, slashing police budgets, I'm not sure accomplishes the more that we need to do to stamp out this kind of systemic racism. And so I'll be interested to see what the impacts and what the community response is on that kind of approach. It's not a simple issue; it's a very complex issue. Has many layers, and certainly social services and the supports that are out there being delivered by federal and provincial governments have been and continue to be inadequate to serve the very, very people that need those resources and services more than ever. And this pandemic has highlighted that and amplified that in many, many dramatic ways. And so I hope that when we come out of this, that we come out of this with a better understanding of where our resources need to be applied, who's responsible to do that, and how do we ensure that we make lives better for everybody in our community. So I'm going to support the motion for sure. Appreciate it coming forward. I think it's a proactive step. But I think there's much that we need to think about and do in terms of Black Lives Matter and the support that we need to give to ensure that we are doing everything we can to also, end systemic racism in our community. I have more speakers. I have Pat Mandy and Jordy Elms. So Pat Mandy, where's yours?
You've touched on some of the things that I wanted to speak to. I originally was not as supportive of the motion, but hearing the discussion around it and the approach and the rationale, I support that motion. However, I do want to be sure that we recognize the many letters that came in. Yes, it was the 20%, but I think we were hearing, and you've touched on it, Mr. Mayor, around the recent events in the Black Lives Matter. And I think it is important to recognize that a lot of those are really reflective of lack of trust in authority. The police is the one that's being represented right now. And it is important to recognize that it's built on generations of discrimination, and they've led to the distrust that we have now. It's important to know that all of those experiences, life experiences, history, are reflected in today's experiences. So, and I also need to state that I do support the Black Lives Matter, but I need to say that there is a lot of racism and discrimination within the Indigenous community as well. I do get comments about things that have happened, and I'm not as worried that things are done because people are evil and they think it. I think most of it is built on lack of knowledge of history, lack of knowledge of the life experiences of many of the people that we deal with that are from diverse communities. And I'm hoping that the survey on diversity and inclusion that we will be doing shortly will help with some of the identification of folks who will be helpful in doing that education. I think one of the first starts might be education of the board, as well as others. I do support Fred's motion or suggestion about getting involved in the community safety program. And actually, he may be a very good person since he's so passionate about it to have a board member involved. But anyway, I really want to say I think this is an important area for us to acknowledge as a board, to acknowledge that the letters are about the 20%, but I think that's just a community suggestion about one way to address without getting into more detail. And we need to know as a board what the impact of various levels of reduction might be. But I think it's really more important about what are the services that are lacking and how can we support and build relationships and trust with the police services board. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Councillor Jackson. Don Jackson.
Mayor, did Jordy have his hand up before me? I'm fine with that. I'll wait.
So I'm going with Jordy was a first-time speaker. He spoke on the motion a little earlier on, so I was going on first-time speakers now, and second time is going to be Jordy.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Whatever you want to do.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I thank Councillor Collins for bringing the motion forward. I'm happy to second it. You've heard me say, Mr. Mayor, from time to time, over the last 20, 25 years, there are two positions, two jobs in today's society, even putting aside what I do in public life, trying to look after 40,000 people approximately as constituents and across the city with citywide issues. There's two positions and jobs today that I could never do, and I admire people who wish to do them, and that is being a teacher and that is being a police officer. And, when you go back many years, the traditional role of a police officer that I recall, youngster growing up, was basically arresting that crook, catching that guy running through the red light, traditional roles of policing. And what I'm saying is somewhat in the themes of what Councillor Collins has said, you, Board Member Bennick, has said as well, that policing has taken, and police officers have taken on I'll call it a non-traditional role, where they're like quasi-marriage counselors at times. They're involved in mental health issues, get involved with the COAST program, tackling poverty to whatever degree is necessary. So community expectations have risen of getting police and police services more involved. I'll tell you right now, Mr. Mayor, I'm open to the conversation, and that's why I'm seconding this motion. But I want, in my East Mountain community, I'm being very pro-kill. I believe the overwhelming majority of my constituents want to retain the level of police services they're getting, if not more. They want it enhanced. The number of times I get requests, Tom, could a police officer just sit on that street in the neighborhood for a few hours that afternoon, be more visible, have a greater presence, is what I believe overall my community wants. I mean, recently, one of my neighborhoods had about a couple of dozen, Mr. Mayor, break and enters, and the great work of Superintendent Greg Hust and Inspector Frank Michioni and the entire team at Division 3, within a matter of a couple of weeks, arrested a couple of people, and ironically on parole as it was. So I want the community I represent as part of this great city to continue to be safe overall and even safer. And if there's certain members of council, and you know, Mr. Mayor, as you know, at budget time, members of council, many of them said, look, I'm going to support this police budget this year, but please, Chief, we need more presence. We need greater visibility in this part of the city, in that ward, in that district. But if there are certain members of council that feel that ultimately the police service budget should be defunded, reduced, and they don't see the need for the current level of service of policing in their districts, Chief Gert, I'm telling you now, seriously, somewhat facetiously, I'd be happy to take those extra resources up to my East Mountain community. Mr. Mayor, Black Lives Matter. You know that I work closely with multicultural, multiracial, multireligious communities within the city that I've been honored to build up a relationship with over my 30 honored years on council. Black Lives Matter. For me, every member of this community has an equal part to play and be respected for. And that's why I'm so glad within the police service, we've got a full-time community relations coordinator now in Jazz Dillon, who's doing tremendous outreach to all the diverse diverse communities within our city. We have Rebecca Moran, Detective Constable, which I know, I hope and believe Chief Gert's going to take under advisement one of the recommendations from Solicitor Bergman, that Rebecca Moran could become possibly a full-time position to deal with the LGBTQ community, Two-Spirit communities as well in our city. So, Mr. Mayor, I just want to conclude by saying that the traditional role of policing has changed a lot. This is a theme that I've heard other board members express. But as far as I'm concerned, at this time, I want to retain the level of service of policing I'm getting out of Division 3, if not enhance it down the road. Let's have this conversation, Mr. Mayor. But I can't tell you the police service of Hamilton are invaluable to ensuring people are not only safe, but feeling and perceiving to be safe as well. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Jordy Elms?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back a little bit to Fred's point. I agree with everything that's been said. I think it's unfortunate that what we're at now, we have been hit, this board meeting, never mind just this board, is at the apex of 3 cataclysmic events. We thought we'd be dealing with one of them today with the Bergman report. We now have intercessions by Black Lives Matter, and we now have the defunding. They're not, although they're connected, they're not all necessarily the same. And I think Fred's mention of the community safety and well-being, I think it's misunderstood. I mean, it's great for the people that have been tasked with it that it's now good into the new year. The truth is, it should be operating now. I've never watched so much news in my life as I have in the last month. But every day I watch the premier come on at 1 o'clock and talk about what's happening at their command table. That command table is exactly the equivalent of what this community and safety well-being thing is supposed to be in our city. It's supposed to be the heads of the people and the operations that can make a difference. You know, they should be, it's the equivalent up of the POC that the chief has in police headquarters. I don't think it's much more complicated. Like their provisions, I see where it's populated. It's got the basic levels on it. It operates, several cities operate it in different things. It requires some police leadership, but it's not by design police led. I think that, you know, we're going to have trouble with some of these other issues. We've opened a door today, but we still don't know if somebody's going to be on the other side of it wanting to talk to us on some of these things. We need to broaden that approach. And I don't, communicating with these communities is important. And, you know, that can be a fairly large square table or whatever. I just think we're misunderstanding what the intent of that plan is. It's not to create a city committee. I think it's to create an emergency response framework that allows the city to be agile in times of crisis. That's my vibe.
Thank you. We may have different understandings about it, but it's a process actually to create a plan, not to be the plan or not to exercise the plan, but to come together to create a plan and start, rationalizing, all the elements that are happening in our community, how that divvies up. And I think Fred explained it pretty well earlier, and I would highly recommend to the chief. And I know I think there's two appointees from the service. I would highly recommend that a board member, and Fred would be a good choice, participate in that process. I think that would be very helpful. Chief, can you just remind me before I get to Donald, who's appointed? I think you're on, as I recall it, and someone else is appointed as well.
Actually, I've asked Deputy Bergman to represent us at that table, and I'll tell you why. His work for modernization in Toronto, his passion for this particular element around crime prevention through social development is right on the mark. I will mirror very quickly some of the comments. It is not police-centric. It really does look to those leaders of the other organization to come to other solutions that do not involve enforcement, that do not involve the judicial process, and really do things upstream. So I think when created, even though it was under the Police Services Act, it really does apply to municipalities to do that work. So we would certainly welcome a member of the board to work along with Frank and our Deputy Bergen. And we know there have been some preliminary meetings. And I also think Paul Johnson, having worked with him in the past, is an excellent choice, both with his background in housing, his work on the Hamilton Anchor Institute leaders, and with the Community Foundation, poverty reduction, Best Start, all that stuff. It really fits the objective of what is trying to be achieved.
But it also requires community engagement, right? This is not just these groups coming together and saying, let's just fashion a plan and bring it to emergency services or police. It's about them engaging community, bringing the elements of community in, and then fashioning a plan that can be delivered to all the various bodies, correct?
Definitely, and we've heard that from Mr. Bergman in terms of our own response. That's why we're more than happy to tread down that path. To his earlier comments, requires the trust in the efforts of those from the community. We're more than happy to work with and in partnership with.
Okay, I'll move a motion in a little while that Fred be appointed to the Community Safety Task Force, and I'm going to turn to Don McVicker. Don?
And thank you, Mr. Chair. And mostly it's just to champion some ideas that are going forward with this. And I think Member Fred's comments on the letters, and I read them all, and I have understanding and the needs, and so that's very a good awareness and our community engagement process. And my desire for being on this board is to help promote and encourage the neighborhood that I've been working in for 40 years now with my wife and I in the North End community in the Keith neighborhood. And when we first started, the kids didn't have much, and we provided a resource. And we got understanding, working with the parents. We got understanding what their needs were, if it was housing, if it was food, and all those things. But some of the kids, they were getting into mischief, break and enters, and carrying knives. And we started to exchange a knife for a basketball. And we had a group of young fellows. They were from Jamaica, and they were the most well polite kids that you'd ever imagine. And we never had one of those kids in any trouble whatsoever. We had other kids that were young offenders and did some things, but these fellows, and they came all the way through our program, and some were from Barbados and Guyana, and they were teased and they were challenged. But the one time I went out, I was driving them back. There was a 17, 18, 19-year-old. We're driving them back from a basketball tournament, and this goes back a little ways, but they said, "Oh no, the police." And I said, "Oh, what's wrong?" They said, "Oh no, it's okay. Don's with us." So it shocked me that that was here, but it gave me a great awareness that desire that when those fellows saw the police, they thought they were going to be in trouble, because prior to that, a week before, the fellow was stopped in his car driving, and that's what happened. So we're listening to the letters we're reading the letters, we're seeing what Member Fred is doing, and the initiative on the budget. All those things are important, but it comes back to community engagement, understanding what the people are saying, and mostly to provide a better tomorrow for folks. And whether that is working with the police directly as board members or working within the community, we're all engaged, heavily engaged in those aspects. But I think there's a new awareness now, and I think we'll be able to move forward on all these initiatives, because we are listening, we do understand, and we have to listen more, and we have to build in more resources and more initiatives to go forward with that, because there are kids out there, and there's teens and seniors that are hurting, and we just want to be a part to make sure that they're in a safe community, and what resources that we can do provide a better place for people in Hamilton to live. Thank you, Mr.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion on the floor, moved by Collins, seconded by Jackson. All in favor of that motion? Any opposers? Seeing none, thank you. Can I move that Fred Bennett be appointed as a participant with the police service on the community safety and wellness? And unless you put your hand up saying you don't want to do this, is that what you're saying, Fred? You want to speak to it? Okay, go ahead.
I'd just like the opportunity to talk to Paul Johnson and Deputy Bergman before I make a decision. Okay. If the board wants me to do that.
All right. We'll put it on hold, and you'll let us know. Okay. Thank you. No further issues on the agenda that I'm aware of, so good time to have a motion to adjourn. Let me just suggest that we're going to go in camera. There'll be a bit of a switchover process, so I'm sure some of you may want to do a thing or two that in between. So 15 minutes.
Sorry, Mayor. If I might.
Sorry. Yeah.
In the correspondence, I think there's some key pieces of misinformation that we need to clean up. It won't be long. One of the items was 8 can't wait. It talks about chokeholds, required warnings before shootings, and so forth. I have asked Nancy Goods Ritchie to provide that background. So carotid restraints, for example, have been prohibited for a long time. Comprehensive reporting, well over 30 years. So if I might, before I do that, there was an item in terms of costs spent in the city-approved budget. And I'll take it quickly from John here. Talked about $78,806 on ammunition. In fact, in that budget, that was a reduction, not an increase. A reduction of $78,000 because of the availability of other ammunition from other services. $95,000 on surveillance, and it's been intimated that that was used for surveillance on the homeless. That, in fact, refers to a 3D scanner for crime scenes that we use in forensics. The last item, $61,409 on tasers, was in fact a transition from the old X26 to the new tasers. So just want to provide clarity. 1 is a reduction, 2 has nothing to do with surveillance externally, and 3 was an update on tasers. So if you don't mind, if I can turn that over, because I think these are highly contentious issues. Some do originate from the States, particularly the 8 can't wait. If I can ask Superintendent Gutzericci just to respond to that.
Okay, thank you.
Hello?
All right, Nancy, go ahead.
So, 8 Can't Wait is a result of an organization, from what I understand, called Campaign Zero, which is out of the states that is looking to add 8 use of force policy reforms that they feel will reduce police violence. And that's how they word it, that's their wording. And in of those 8, one of those, as the chief mentioned, was specific to chokeholds and strangleholds. I can tell you that in Hamilton, we do not teach those. We do not endorse those at all. The level of force that our members use in any situation always has to be the minimum level of force to effect a lawful purpose. There were other things within the 8 Can't Wait reforms as well. I'd just like to briefly chat about. One of those talks about de-escalation. I can tell you that part of our use of force training has in fact included de-escalation strategies for quite a few years now. And actually for the last 3 years, even on our academic side of training, that we have also spoke about communication strategies in order to help reduce even the need for a use of force answer. There was another one that the police give a verbal warning before shooting a civilian. Our recruits at the Ontario Police College and here, part of our use of force training does include the provincial police challenge, which is police don't move. And we, as I mentioned, we continue that training as part of our recertification training in Hamilton.
Sorry, can you explain that a little better? Police don't move, meaning?
So, sure. When we are encountering a situation where we are needing to draw our firearm, part of the training that they provide at the police college, as well as our annual recertification, is that as we're drawing our firearm, we say to the subject, "Police don't move." And as I said, that's part of our certification. The next one is that we are required to exhaust all other reasonable means before resorting to deadly use of force. As I mentioned in the first one, our members are responsible for all of the use of force that they use. It has to be only used to bring a situation under control effectively and safely, and members are responsible for their actions, both criminally, civilly, and under the Police Services Act. The next one for the policy reforms for 8 Can't Wait, that officers have a duty to intervene when witnessing the use of excessive force by a fellow officer and report incidents immediately to supervisors. So all police officers in Ontario are regulated by the Ontario Police Services Act. There are code of conduct implications to something like this, specifically discreditable conduct or neglect of duty, and further, there could in fact be criminal implications for an officer failing to take the necessary action that is required. The sixth one is that officers are restrained from shooting at moving vehicles, a tactic that has proven dangerous and effective. This is very clearly prohibited within our policies unless there exists an immediate threat of death or grievous bodily harm to the officer or to a member of the public by means other than a vehicle. The seventh is that there's an established force continuum which limits the type of force or weapons that can be used in specific types of resistance. Yes, we do have an Ontario use of force model. It's made to promote continuous critical assessment and evaluation of every situation. It looks at officers considering a number of factors, including the situation, subject's behavior, the officer's perception, as well as tactical considerations. The final one is that are required to report each time they use force or threaten to use force against civilians. This is what we typically call a use of force report. It is mandated by all police officers. There are a number of times that it's outlined within the Police Services Act where we are required to submit that use of force report, which actually changed January 1st of 2020 to collect race-related data as well. And if pending any questions.
Okay, so I forgot I was going to raise that, but out of the 8 that they're recommending is actually implement, all 8 of them are already implemented in Ontario.
Correct, and we here in Hamilton have been, in addition to that, like specific to de-escalation, I can tell you we've been doing these things for several years as well.
Thank you. Can we get that in kind of a document form, for the benefit of anyone that might want to share it with folks that are making these kinds of assertions and recommendations? So, can you do that?
Great, and I'll speak to that for the superintendent. I suspect she's already written it out, and yes, we can do that in terms of correspondence that comes in. But one of my approaches today was that because we're in a public session and there are multiple, I'll call them form letters, that we have it available both publicly in a broader context, but we can mail to the specific people as well.
Good, thank you. Any comments or questions on it? Thank you, Nancy Goodsritchie, for that information. And I think it's, I knew that and I forgot to raise it. Thanks, Chief, for bringing it up because I was reminding myself to put it on the agenda, but here we are. So good, important information for the community at large to have that we're certainly adhering some of those very important principles. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Vickers, seconded by Fred. All in favor? And I'm going to suggest 15 minutes, so it gives you an opportunity to do a bio break and gives them staff here an opportunity to do what they need to do and then reset ourselves for the in-camera session. So we're back here at 22. Thank you.
We need to talk right now. There's something on my mind.